Looking at the quad activities itself is a quad 2 activity. So we'll look at that now. In terms of what the quad activities are, Christy, I was wondering if you could take us through a little bit of what we've got in the Wise Hub around the quad activities and really how you implement the quad activities in your firm. So
it's so important. And the two go hand in hand in recognizing your quad activities and being able to delegate successfully to your team members or even outside of your firm. So looking at the small things each day that you're doing, what is consuming your time, and using your quad activity sheet in the Wise Vault, or if you have a Wise Hub set up, starting to use this to filter through all of the things, because so often we get caught up in the busy work, the noise of getting things done. And we feel like, oh, we just did a 10-hour day. We must have achieved so much. But if you actually break it down, how many things did you complete that day? Would you actually look back on it as a leader and think it was a successful day? Or, I think to Jamie, who's running a $4 or $5 million firm now, and he works 7 hours a week. Yeah. So often we can think that can't be possible to have a firm that size. You must be working 40, 50 hours. You don't have to if you recognize what you're doing with your time, what quadrant you're spending your time in, and ensuring that you're spending as much time that you allocate to your firm as you can in quad 2, not in quad 1. Build a team that can support you to take the quad 1 activities away so you can develop and grow your team.
Yeah. Really well said, Christy. Calls itself like a delegating demon, and delegating is a large part of it. And we'll look at how you do that, really implementing the 4 quads. The first part is actually doing the quad exercise, which I'll show you in a second how we can do that in the new Wise Hub. Some of the best IP they've put in here. And then once you've analyzed it, well, what do you do with the things that you shouldn't be doing? You've got to delegate them. And we've got a way of doing that in a systematic way as well. And it really is important for the owner to do this first, because the owner is probably the most expensive resource in the firm, and therefore the one that you should be using, the business should be using in the most appropriate way. But also, if they can get into strategic things, which is quad 2, and improving the business, it's going to filter on to employees and clients. It can't be overstated how important it is for the owner if they're able to be taking on more of that activity. A lot of those things in quad 2, they're not urgent, so they don't necessarily get done. But like my friends who run these really big businesses, $4 or $5 million businesses, they're stuck and they're kind of stunting the career growth of their employees as well, because they're unable to do these not urgent but important things. So just quickly, if you haven't heard of the quads before and we're talking gibberish, it's something that Dr. Stephen Covey came up with or is famous for talking about. Maybe he didn't invent them. There's 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important, and that's the stuff that kind of tends to distract us because it's urgent. So it might be something like a client calling or a client emailing or an employee saying, I've got this huge issue. It's those urgent things where you kind of have to stop what you're doing and deal with it. And they're also important things. So they're not things that, some urgent things you can kind of ignore, if that makes sense. So they're things that you shouldn't really, or you can't ignore because they're important, but they are also urgent. The other quadrant up the top, which is important, is quadrant 2, which is important, but it's not urgent. If you can think of things like in your personal life, it might be like getting fit, eating healthy food. It's not urgent that you do those things. You won't go to hospital from having a heart attack immediately as a result of it, or you won't get diabetes immediately. It's very gradual, but it is important that you do those things. And it's not urgent. If you can put it off without feeling any stress, it's definitely not urgent, right? But it still might be important. And really, when we think of a business, when you're working in the business, seeing clients or what have you, or managing staff, you are in quad 1. So it's not that quad 1's bad. It's not bad because it's important. So this is something that's really crucial. It is important. So it is good to be in that quadrant. The issue is when you're only in that quadrant. If you're in a leadership position and you're only in that quadrant, over a long time, the business is going to suffer as a result. It won't grow, which means no growth means no possibilities or opportunities for staff. It means that the owners aren't going to get capital growth either. It means that the clients won't be serviced as well as they might be, for instance. So something like training is a quad 2 activity, unless it's kind of legally mandated, which it is in Australia. And I think it is around the world for accountants. You don't have to train. And a good example of this is junior staff. You don't have to train junior staff. I think it's the norm out of all the firms I've worked with in Wise and in my own firm to not train staff. staff. I've seen people for 10 years not really improve in terms of their professional ability. It's kind of amazing to think about, but it's true because it's not urgent and because firms don't know how to do it. But your staff are your greatest single asset and resource. So it's crazy not to train them. Think about how much compounding happens if you could train someone over 10 years, how much better they'd be by year 10. But yeah, recognizing new opportunities, JVs, marketing, doing tuck-ins, networking, educating staff, using acknowledgement letters, scheduling the work. These are all quad 2 activities. And you'll notice that doing all these things takes extra work. And because it's not urgent, you might not feel like you should be doing this, especially if you're kind of drowning in quad 1, as a lot of people are. But the kind of paradox is that if you do these quad 2 activities, it results in a more calm, more peaceful business. So Ed always talks about sharpening the saw. That's another kind of way of looking at it. There's two people with saws in a forest and one's hacking down trees with a blunt saw. One stops to sharpen the saw and the one hacking down the tree says, oh, I'm going to, why would you do that? You could be chopping trees right now. And the guy who sharpens the saw quickly overtakes the one with the blunt saw. That's a classic kind of quad 2, quad 1 little parable, I guess, for you. If quad 1 is working in the business, then quad 2 is working on the business. Everything we do in Wise is quad 2. Doesn't matter if you're an employee or an owner. If you're coming to these monthly calls, if you're having internal meetings about the business, not about clients, but about the business, we use the Fab 5 for the managers meetings, for instance. Even a daily huddle, while it's dealing with quad 1 things, doing a daily huddle, the act of having a daily huddle is a quad 2 activity. You don't have to have a daily huddle. You can put it off. 3 is urgent, but not important. Could be like a Facebook message getting pinged on your phone or, a social media update pinging on your phone, junk email, a phone call from a salesperson. They're urgent because they're grabbing your attention, but they're not important. And they take up a lot of our time. I think even me today, they still take up a lot of my time, these things. And the more you can ignore these things, the more time you'll have back to do quad 2 activities. Because what a lot of people say is they don't have time to do quad 2 activities and they think it's because they're in quad 1. It's because they're in quad 1, 3, and 4. And obviously you can't not do quad 1 because it's important. You can not do quad 3 and 4. 4 is not urgent and not important. That's like literally going on social media without having that prompt. Things that just don't have any output at all or reason for doing them. And why do people do quad 3 and 4 things when they're not important? It's relaxing. Maybe it's enjoyable. It feels like they're being productive even though they're not. Especially in admin, I found a lot of people in admin do quad 3 and 4, not realizing that it's not important. Doing an audit of every admin task in your business is a quad 2 activity. And I highly recommend that if you haven't done that yet, because you can see, I would say, I don't know what the percentage is, but a large portion of admin tasks that I've seen across my time working in my own firm and other firms, it doesn't have an immediate output. That's another way of looking at it. So that's just a quick snapshot on the quads. If you don't work on quad 2 activities, they do actually become urgent eventually. You're kind of putting things off, if that's another way of looking at it.
It's really about being strategic, isn't it, in quad 2?
Yeah.
So that you prevent as many things as you can becoming urgent. And then you also put in structure to deal with the things when they are urgent and you can't fix them.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff just isn't even on my radar. And I think that's the case for a lot of quad 2 things. They're not things that come to mind immediately until you have situations that trigger them like that, Warren.